Hey students, let's look at Chapter 5, Installing and Configuring Desktop Applications. So realize again, one of the things we might look at doing with some of these aspects is doing it on a master image and then pushing that master image out to other computers. So I'm going to basically skip the overview here, and we'll talk about program defaults. So I'll make a subsequent video that will go with this, where I'll go in and change some of those default programs and show you how that might work. So as we look at this here, configuring default programs, there we go. We have a couple ways to do it. We can do all of the file associations, so file types that a program can open. So we can set a default program to manage all of the file types it knows it can handle, or we can go into the individual file type, which tends to be more of how we do it, and assign a program that becomes the default. So as we'll see, I'll use a default instance of Windows, and we'll see that like an MP3 opens in the Windows Music, a video will open in the Microsoft Video application. We can change those to use applications that we might better prefer. So to set default program interfaces enables you to specify which types of are associated with an application. So again, we might, decide that a certain application needs to do MP3s, while another application might be better suited for, say, a WAV file. So setting default programs, what we do is we go in here, you'll see this on the subsequent video, we choose a program, and we can move forward with assigning what the program will handle. So default programs, like here's an example of, the Photos program from Microsoft Corporation in Windows 8, and the file association. So you can see if I click on a bitmap file, that's right down here, that it will go ahead and associate with that photo program. So we can modify the file associations, pretty simple to do. Again, that's going into that second level, and we can pick an individual file like an ACC. If you notice right now, a .acc opens in Music. We can click on that. We can change the ACC to open, say in iTunes if we had iTunes installed, or again, another program that simply would accept and knows what to do with an ACC file. So when we model file association, what we're going to get is something like this. The computer tends to know what program, so we're looking at a .docx. We can open a docx in Word, of course, WordPad, Internet Explorer according to this, Notepad, and even Paint. Kind of interesting. So that's talking about applications. Now we're going to switch to another aspect, which is what happens when external media such as a CD, DVD, USB drive is put into the computer. So we can decide how the computer handles those things. So the actions that the operating system will take when those are put into the computer. So we can actually change that policy, and of course it tends to apply to some main things. For example, okay, a removable drive has a bunch of music on it. Choose what to do with the type of media that's on there. What am I going to do with it? Am I going to open it in this program? Am I not going to open it? Am I going to, when I see a music CD, am I going to copy it? What is it that I'm going to do with that? Now, of course, we can also change that to, one of the common things is do nothing with it, just open a directory and let me choose files and what I want to do with those. So program access defaults. So control panel enables you to create a program configuration that specifies which applications Windows 8 should use for specific things. So notice it says such as browse the web. Gee, if we haven't installed Firefox or Chrome, what do you want to bet Internet Explorer is going to browse the web? Now, although we can do this in the operating system, as we know, when we install a new browser, one of the features is for it to go in and make this change to make, say, Chrome my default browser, meaning if I click on a link, it should open Chrome, and take me out to browse the web. So realize that Internet Explorer now is heavily embedded into the operating system, so you're not going to get rid of it. And as we know, especially in this class, the MOAC labs, all we get to use is Internet Explorer. So there's enough ActiveX, there's enough specific IE programming going on within MOAC that we're simply not going to be able to use another browser and be successful in running the labs necessarily. So, we can do Windows, we can do non-Microsoft things, we can customize it. So access defaults, use my current browser. So, if I have other browsers, use Internet Explorer. Default email. So again, if I install Outlook and have Outlook, I can choose that. What to do with media, etc. So that brings us up to the idea of Windows Installer. And Windows Installer, of course, is software that helps us to install, repair, remove engine that can simplify the process of deploying applications on Windows computers. So basically what we're able to do is use Windows Installer and create scripts, command line parameters that help us install or streamline the installation of the application. So what we can do is then we have two things, and we'll talk about this later in the course, but we can either assign applications using group policy, which means sending the application based on, say, this person is an engineer, they should have Autodesk installed, we can push that application out, or we can publish applications. So what the installer does is allows us to more easily install the applications out to a bunch of computers and do whatever custom configuration we need to do so that we don't have to go around to 500 computers and configure, hey, once you install this, it's a client-server application. You're looking at the client. The client needs to be redirected to this path, say on a file server, for example. So, as we know, program compatibility is huge. This was a bigger issue back with later operating systems when operating systems didn't have the full functionality of backward compatibility. So consequently, an application that was written and ran and performed well on XP may not work well on Vista, for example. Okay, so but now there's that. Microsoft has done very well with the Windows 8 compatibility. It's the idea of simulating, removing the features that are in the new software that may create an issue for an application to run, and essentially giving it a compatibility area, okay, to run in. So if we have a program that's not running successfully, we can right-click on the executable and go to Troubleshoot and run a wizard that will say, hey, here's what we see is wrong. This is best run, say, in a Vista, for example, a Vista emulation. So the computer is built to do that, and we can run this troubleshooter. Now, I've got to be real honest with you all and say, okay, so here's the troubleshooting program for compatibility. It worked in earlier versions. Doesn't open. The program opens but doesn't display correctly. A lot of times video, right? The graphical user interface, as we know, extensive use of computer hardware and resources on a computer, so it could be the issue. Requires additional permissions, so maybe we need to actually script that when it opens, maybe that program itself needs to run as administrator. There's changes that need to be made at the administrative level when it runs. I've run into that a few times, especially with engineering programs that want to make changes to the operating system as they're used, or I don't see the problem listed. I got to tell you, I very seldom run this. If I'm having an issue where I know I'm going to need to install an older version of a program onto a newer computer, I find it simply, especially with Windows Professional, I can create virtual machines. I'm going to create a virtual machine, throw the application on there if it's individual. If it's not, I'm going to do what's demonstrated later, which is virtualize the application onto a server and allow them to reach it through through that mechanism. Now, that mechanism, some of you may remember the idea of terminal services, and virtualization is basically the improved terminal services. So I can create compatibility mode, so maybe it is a program that if I create a compatibility mode, will simply run in place locally on the machine. So compatibility modes, notice, go way back, 95, 98, XP, and again, what they're simulating is the programming, the commands, the etc. that were in that operating system that may have been changed in more recent operating systems, which limit an older application from running. So compatibility mode settings, I can do things like, change the resolution, display scaling of DPI images. There is a bunch of stuff that I can do in there. Again, how much time, here's the big thing. If an old application isn't running, go out to Google, do some troubleshooting. You'll probably find out exactly what settings you need, either in compatibility, or you might find that somebody's tried compatibility, it still didn't run real well. They created a virtual machine with the older operating system, installed the application, and off they went. So, suppress application compatibility warnings. Administrators can use group policy. We're going to talk a lot about group policy because that's how we manage these computers in a corporate environment. We want to make changes one time, not on 5,000 computers. We want that one change within Active Directory and group policy to affect those 5,000 computers, or affect a computer based on the user that's using it, what department it's in, what location it may be in, etc. So you can read through these, notify block drivers, detect applications. So these are all things that we can configure. Incompatibility policies, do we want to turn off the compatibility engine? Maybe we don't want older applications to run, for example. So we can get into group policy management and do a lot of these things as well. One of the big ones may be to turn off, at least in my environment, to turn off the requirement for signed drivers, because I inevitably will get a driver that's not signed, and the default is to not install it. So again, configuring application compatibility, prevent access to 16-bit applications, remove program compatibility property page, do a lot of these things. That way the end user doesn't necessarily make mistakes with their computer, break it, etc. So finally, that idea of virtualizing applications using AppV. So when you virtualize an operating system, you create a separate partition space with the virtual resources that appear just like physical ones. Yeah, we love virtualization. It means we no longer have to dual boot, tri-boot, quad boot a system. The other reason is virtualization. We can run multiple operating systems via one hardware configuration at the same time. So we use this again in applications, and it's very complex. There's a whole huge white paper on how to set it up. Microsoft bought a program called SoftGrid. It creates a customized virtualized environment for an application that you can deploy to clients from a server. So basically, client server, you got to have the AppV client installed. They're going to reach out to a server. The application's there. The cool thing about this is reduce application installation time and eliminate potential conflicts between applications, because they're essentially each running in their own sandbox. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, the idea behind Java that made it so secure is that we could run multiple JavaScripts that couldn't see each other, weren't going to cause each other issues because they're running in their own sandbox. So you play in your box, I'll play in mine. So the same thing holds here. We need an application server, we need a client, we'll do some management in the console, we need a database, and a sequencer. So I would highly suggest you go out and do more research. There's some great YouTube videos on setting up or just learning more about what AppV is. But basically this idea of having to put all these applications, given that we have bandwidth, we now have gigabit, and better bandwidths, we no longer need to worry about bandwidth as an issue. Thus, we can have servers that are basically hosting all the applications we used to have to install on a client computer. And the great thing about that is if I need to update the application, well, I'm only updating it one time. So it creates an instance of the application. If I need to configure the application with some custom configurations, I'm configuring it one time. I'm not having to go around and constantly update it on thousands of servers. You know, of course, there are applications that better run in application virtualization. Wouldn't you imagine? Most Microsoft applications, because they're being programmed, you know, will run pretty efficiently here. So again, it's another alternative. So there's a quick lecture video for Chapter 5. And like I said, I will include a video where I go in and I'll make some changes to some file associations so that we can see what that's like. Take care.